All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Hello. Thanks for coming out today and staying until the end. We are going to go out with a bang. My name is Philip Beavers, and I run the SRE teams that work on Google Cloud Platform here in London. So today, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of how we support the software side of GCP. I've really got two goals. Firstly, I want you to understand how Google keeps an infrastructure like this together. And secondly, I want to give you some ideas that you can take home to your own teams, both organizationally about how you can work better, and also tools that you could be using to deal with the sorts of problems that you face day to day. So firstly, a little bit about me. I have been working at Google for just over 2.5 years now. I run the technical infrastructure and cloud compute SRE teams here in London. That is just short of 90 people at the last count. Before that, I spent 17 years as chief architect at a software vendor called Fidessa, where we built trading systems for investment banks. And the really interesting thing about that particular journey was we transitioned early on from being a traditional enterprise software vendor who sold our software for on-premises usage by banks to a hosted software as a service type of vendor. And that's a really interesting transition because when you're an enterprise software vendor, the expenditure of operating the platform does not come back to you. When you are a software as a service provider, the cost of operating the platform immediately comes off your bottom line. So I learned a massive amount of things about running your own software from working at Fidessa. And really, I think we were doing a bunch of SRE-like things without really knowing it. And really, that's when my interest in running software in production first started. So I'm going to talk about what SRE is. But firstly, I'm going to talk about why Google chose to create SRE rather than having a more traditional ops function. So let's think a bit about the traditional ops role. Who in this room is in what they would consider to be a traditional ops or sysadmin type of role? Any hands up? Small number of hands up, probably a dozen people. So you are risk averse. That is part of your job description. You have the job of keeping services up and running. This makes you risk averse. It's entirely natural. It's the right thing for your job. Developers have a different role. So who in this room is a developer? Who develops and launches stuff? Rather more people. Developers have the job of launching new features to grow our business. Launching features, introducing change, introduces risk. Remember that I said the other set of people were risk averse? Well, this introduces risk. And risk sometimes leads to downtime. The problem in that tension between the two groups is that often that can descend into outright hostility. A few of you are smiling. You may be familiar with the idea that sometimes developers and operations folks become openly hostile to each other because one wants to launch and one would like to be risk averse. Unfortunately, that is a fundamental problem for your organization. It slows you down. What your business actually needs is both uptime and launching of new features. That's how you reach your business goals. A reliable service that is evolving all the time and launching new stuff for your customers. So how do we go about solving this? Well, obviously, the way that we went about solving this at Google was inventing this discipline called SRE. This particular quote is how our VP, Ben Traynor, chooses to describe SRE. And there are two important terms here that I just wanted to pull out and talk a little bit more about. The first one is software engineer. It explicitly says software engineer. We passionately believe that our services run better when the people running them also understand them deeply. That's why our SREs are software engineers. And secondly, design and run. We actively design production. We actively design what we want production to look like. And we make sure that production constraints are part of the design of our software solutions. They are part of the design of GCP. We believe that when you do those things, reliability goes up. way up, massively up. Now, there are many, many different aspects to SRE, and these are some of them. Reliability, scalability, and performance are primary. Those are the types of functions that our SREs spend much of their time working on. But it's a whole lot of other things as well, doing all of these activities and more besides in order to support GCP and, of course, other Google.com services as well. And the rest of this presentation is about how we created and run those teams and how they do what they do. So first up, how do we structure SRE from an organizational perspective? There are a bunch of very difficult questions that come out of the previous quote from Ben. For example, how do we make sure that we can hire software engineers into a role that is focused on production, but still keep them happy, still make them want to do it? How do we also keep that team valued inside the company? How do we make them a valued member of the Google engineering community? How do we help the SRE and the dev teams communicate better and resolve disagreements using data-driven decision-making rather than assertions of power? And most importantly, how do we avoid fighting over whether or not a new version of the software can actually launch or not? How do we take the emotion out of that kind of decision-making? So the way that we do this is through 4 pillars that, if you put them together, really make up the SRE organization, and I'm going to talk through those in a little bit more depth. The first thing that we do is we level the playing field. We make sure that both our developers and our SREs are given the same language and the same skills to support a mutual respect between the groups and efficient communication. The way that we do that is we make sure that all of our SREs pass coding interviews. All of our SREs have to pass coding interviews. And in addition, they have to pass system design interviews, architecture questioning, that kind of stuff. So they come into Google with the same skills, the same family of skills as our software engineers. It's really the same skills with a different domain of application. So both developers and SREs work on designs together for new services with really different areas of focus. SREs, when we're designing a service, are focused on reliability, scalability, architecture, architectural anti-patterns that we know aren't going to scale. These are the things that SREs all have at their fingertips and can very quickly bring that expertise to bear on new services that we're designing and building at Google. And there's huge benefit in that. Secondly, we need to actually structure the organization correctly so that we don't turn into a traditional operations group. And one of the ways that we do that is by giving the development team a reason not to just let the operational work build up. We do that by making the dev organization provide the headcount for SREs. That comes off their own headcount. If there is too much operational work, they won't be able to hire so many developers, and fewer features will get written. Less stuff will get launched. We also make SRE a separate organization. We make it a discipline all of its own, a separate organization with separate goals. That means that the SREs have a constant focus on reliability. Reliability is their number one goal. We also give our SREs authority. SRE teams have their own authority and power. Team members are empowered to be engineers with a specific goal of making the platform reliable, scalable, everything else, not just pushed around like a pager monkey. SREs get the critical power to say no when necessary in order to save production, in order to make sure we keep delivering reliable services to our customers. But there's also a scarcity. So whilst development teams can donate headcounts in order to get support for a new service, SREs are not plentiful within Google. SREs might also choose not to work on a service which is unreliable. The scarcity of that SRE support means that having SRE support for your service is not a given at Google. Actually, very few Google services get SRE support. Very few get that privilege, just the most business critical. The third pillar is environment. So we create an environment which people want to work in and which gives them career growth. We guarantee 50% project work. What that means is that operational work needs to be capped at an absolute maximum of 50%. If it goes over that, if our SREs feel like they need to spend more than 50% of their time doing operational work, the extra gets handled by the development team. We don't let our SREs spend more than half of their time doing operational stuff. We also have a respect for work-life balance, so we run 12-hour on-call shifts, and if an incident spans those shifts, we hand it off efficiently. We hand off to the next on-caller so that our current on-caller can get to bed, go to sleep, and be ready for their next shift, not be exhausted the next day. And also, absolutely critically, SRE is a volunteer army. You don't get conscripted into SRE. You can transfer freely at Google to other SRE teams, possibly even to suite teams. So what that means is that engineers will flee a bad team. If a team is known to be unhealthy, there will be problems staffing that team. We even have a program called Mission Control that lets our developers try out SRE for 6 months, learn about production, and take what they've learned back to the world of traditional suite teams. The result of all of this stuff is that teams are fluid. People come into and out of SRE and dev teams. And we get shared experiences and perspectives from that, and we get an empathy between the groups, which works very well. And we also have a budget. But it's not a budget for cash, it's a budget for errors. So let's say, for instance, your service is advertised as 3 nines of availability. Does anybody here run a service that claims to provide 3 nines of availability? Yep, a few hands up, 3 nines. So at Google, we don't want 3 nines to mean that I need to have at least 3 nines, but more is better. We don't want to do that. What we want it to mean is that instead you get 0.1% of the time when your service can be unavailable. You can think of that as a budget that you can spend any way you want. You can spend your unavailability any way you want. Take as many risks as you want up to the point where you've expended the budget. We call it taking the nines for a spin. You can launch faster if there is still error budget available. If you do that, that means you're going to get more features in front of your customers, and you'll be able to make GCP better faster. However, if you took the other path and you decided to test your software poorly and you keep having outages due to bugs, you won't have the budget to keep on pushing releases, and you will naturally get throttled. So this takes the emotion out of those decisions about launching that I was talking about up front. This means we don't have that confrontation between the SRE and the dev teams, because we have an absolute measure that says whether you can launch or not. Now, if there are multiple dev teams, that also means SRE doesn't have to mediate. There is a single measure that gives us that flag of whether we can launch or not. It's for the service, it's not for the specific team. The result of this really is that the dev team controls the pace of rollouts. There is no big bad ops team refusing to let them do anything. There are no VPs in a smoke-filled room quarreling about whether stuff can be launched or not. Now, obviously, sometimes these things get a little bit extreme. The relationship works best when there are clear criteria for the support that you're providing. If those criteria that you've set are not met over extended periods, and that 50% operational work is one of those criteria, SREs are empowered to respectfully do the opposite of onboarding a service and offboard it. Give it back to the dev team. Don't work on it anymore. What this means is that the SREs are not forever cast as victims. They do not have an obligation to provide pager support at all costs. And SRE support is a spectrum. There is an array of ways in which SREs can help dev teams, from very informal consultation at one end of the spectrum to full 24/7 pager support right at the other end. We often have multiple different engagements ongoing with the same team at the same time at different points of the spectrum. So for example, for new services, we might just be consulting on new ideas. We might be working together to create a design, or we might be working towards improving reliability such that SRE can at some point take the pager. There's a whole range of these kind of engagements that we will be working through at any one time. I now want to talk a little bit about some of the culture and the processes that help to keep our organization running. And the first one of these is something called Wheel of Misfortune. So in addition to on-call shadowing and extensive classroom-based training, we also have a sort of role-playing game that we play, and it's called Wheel of Misfortune. This is a role-play of production incidents. The way it works is one member of the team comes up to the meeting with a particular scenario and runs that scenario through. They take charge of it, they describe the system state, they might even have prepared some graphs to show to the audience, and they will also reflect the impact of any actions that folks take to try and fix the incident. We then put one person on the spot to respond to the incident and see how they do. It's a safe environment. There are no problems if they mess it up. But this is a very, very useful learning aid, and we use it in a number of different ways. We will often do these things as actually group troubleshooting, so we'll actually get the whole team to work together and try and troubleshoot things. And because we run very complex systems with a large number of dependencies, it's rare for even our most experienced engineers to turn up these things and just know the answer. It's pretty rare. So this is great for new on-callers, and in fact, we sometimes use this sort of thing as a test, a kind of a driving test, if you like, for people to get their license to go on call. But we also use it for veterans. It's also very useful for veterans to refresh what they know, or also refresh procedure rather than just technical knowledge. So I've got a little quiz for you now. Let's assume that you are a Google SRE. Put yourself in my shoes, and let's imagine you look after Gmail, and you get a support report that says that users can see other users' emails in their Gmail. Now there are 4 options that I'm going to give you that you could do. Would you like to call your team lead, call your VP, call for a pizza, or shut it down? I'm not going to run through all 4 things, but who thinks C is the right answer? Well, a couple of people think C. Yeah, I thought there might be. Who thinks A or B might be the right answer? A couple of people think A or B. Who thinks D might be the right answer? Who are the brave people that think D is the right answer? Very good. So the right answer is D. A critical part of incident management at Google is that individual SREs running a particular service are empowered to make any and all decisions necessary to protect Google, even if that means shutting down something as critical as Gmail. The goal of the SRE is to get the service working properly again. We concentrate very much on mean time to recovery. Troubleshooting, root causing can happen once the crisis is past. In order to drive that kind of post-mortem troubleshooting, we have very, very thorough records of binary state. We have extremely thorough logging, which automatically gets saved away. I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the talk. And that allows us to do the root causing after the event. The SRE culture is to recover first, mitigate and recover first, root cause later on. Root causing is not a time-critical activity. Here's another quiz for you. This is probably another scenario that you may be slightly more familiar with than a breakage in Gmail. But let's imagine for a moment that a new engineer has joined your development team, and they have pushed some code out to production, which broke the service for 3 hours. Who are you going to blame? Who thinks A is the right person to blame? Nobody in the room thinks A is the right person to blame. B, C, D, or E? Anybody want to argue for one of those? There's a few B's, a few D's and E's. Somebody might have said C, I'm not sure. It's essentially all of those things except for A. If a new engineer shows up and writes code that takes down your service, it is not the fault of the engineer. It is all of the gates and the processes between the engineer and production which should have been working in concert to make sure that it never happened in the first place. And that really brings us to what might be the most critical piece of SRE culture that we have, which is the idea of the blameless postmortem. Incidents are best solved and best prevented from recurring when you know what happens. As a result, it follows that your best way of solving an outage quickly and resolving it for the future is knowing precisely who did what and when. The problem is that fails if people are afraid to speak up. If people think that they are going to get fired, ridiculed, or get a poor performance review because they did something that was perceived to be bad, they're not going to speak up. They're going to cover up for themselves. So we write blameless postmortem with the emphasis very much on the blameless. We do that to figure out how to prevent, detect, and mitigate repeat occurrences. Those three things give us defense in depth. Of course, we would like to prevent any possible occurrence, but we want to learn from outages, and if they do happen again, we want to make sure that we detect them more quickly, and we have mechanisms for mitigating them quickly as well. Now, blameless does not mean that there are not names and details. There are those things in postmortems, but blameless means we strongly assume that the fault is with the processes, environment, systems, and work practices, not with the people. If you're a cloud platform customer, you'll be familiar with the fact that we write incident reports and publish incident reports on the cloud status dashboard after significant outages. And they're a good example of things that come out of our postmortem culture. I'd now like to talk a little bit about how we actually do our job and some of the data visualizations, maybe some of the tools that we find most useful in SRE. First, I want to talk a bit about paging, about the type of thing that should actually make your phone buzz and have you running for the keyboard. Our goal is uptime, so our goal is reliability. As such, if there is an outage, we want to have rapid recovery. Now that means you need rapid and reliable rollback and failover. It's worth noting that pager fatigue is actually a real thing. So the idea of carrying a device which could buzz and interrupt your day, make you run to the keyboard and try and fix something, that's actually quite stressful. And each one of those incidents when that pager actually goes off is a stressful thing. Pager duty runs a real risk of burnout in your people. It runs a real risk of burnout in your engineers. So we try to avoid that by, for example, having no transient issues. We don't want to get paged and then get to the computer to find that the problem went away. We also have a hard limit on what acceptable pager load actually looks like. So we check this pretty regularly. We make sure that all of our teams have a pager load per shift that is below a nominated limit. We also are very much aware of response time. So if your pager goes off and you're expected to respond within, say, 3 minutes, that's a lot more stressful than if you've got an hour to respond. So we let that required response time feed into the length and frequency of your shifts. If you have a small response time, we recognize that you're going to need longer to recover. You're going to need longer to recharge your batteries ready for the next time that you're on call. And as I mentioned earlier, we adhere to our shift length. We do 12-hour shifts, and at the end of those shifts, we hand off to the next on-caller. It's rare for us to carry an incident beyond the end of our shift. It would have to be the most serious of incidents in order for us to do that. And perhaps the most important point, particularly for new on-callers, is that you should feel safe to take the pager. You should know that there is help at hand. You need to know that there are well-documented, reliable escalation paths for you to fall back on if you can't fix a problem. At large scale, you may well need to pull in experts from other teams. You should have a formal incident management methodology for that type of incident that tells you exactly how to do that. And you should practice it in those win or misfortune exercises. That sort of methodology gives you a tool set for coordinating response to incidents and ensuring effective communication between all of those extra people that you pull in. Now, that paging philosophy and the focus on recovery means that we need great debugging tools for incident response and also for post-mortem analysis. So what we find is that the scale that we work at, text, grepping the log files, this is not good enough. It turns out humans are great at things like pattern matching and anomaly detection if you give them the right visualizations. So we make great use of graphs, heat maps, network topology diagrams, anything like that, anything that we can do pictorially that looks kind of different today to how it looked yesterday. Humans are good at spotting those things. You should instrument everything. We instrument everything extremely thoroughly, and we collect a whole bunch of timestamped time series data throughout the stack. Analyzing that kind of stuff is a genuine big data problem. So a lot of the tools that you see us externalizing through GCP are things that are inspired by internal tools that solve the same kind of issues. Now, the final fallback is actually powerful log searching. Having said that grepping the log files isn't enough, we do actually have extremely powerful log file searching capabilities, and you can get the same sort of thing in your cloud projects by exporting your logs to BigQuery, for instance. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to externalize these tools in GCP through things like Stackdriver and through BigQuery log ingestion and many other things besides. So if this talk has interested you and you want to know more, there is lots more information in the O'Reilly book that we published earlier this year, around about April time. I've included some of the sample chapter names on this slide. This has been written by the engineers who do this every day. The folks who edited this book are SREs. The folks who wrote all the content are SREs, and they genuinely do this stuff. This is really the hard work and dedication of, I think, over 70 contributors with, in total, over 500 years of Google experience. So there's an awful lot in this book. It is not a lightweight book. There's a wide variety of stuff in it, covered in some depth. Everything that I've talked about is covered in quite a lot of detail, and there's a lot more in here besides. So thanks for your time today. I hope you are walking away with some ideas to take home, whether that is changing the relationship between your dev folks and your developers and your ops folks, whether it's rethinking how you handle incidents, or whether it is stuff around tools in particular. If you have any questions, I think we have some microphones. Feel free to stick your hand up, and someone with a microphone will run towards you. We have a question right down here at the front, of course. So our microphone runner has to run right the way down to the front.
Is it on? That's better.
It's on now.
Okay, thanks for sharing the insights there. Even with a blameless culture, there's still a set of quality standards to uphold. If you have someone who is on the front line, has had all the training, passed all the exams in theory, and so on and so forth, and then consistently bails, they consistently balk and go, no, I need to call somebody else, I need to call in other people rather than taking it. How do you handle that?
So that becomes a management problem in that, generally speaking, it's okay to ask for help. But clearly there are social norms in terms of what we expect people to be able to handle. And this is a situation that I've never had myself. We're lucky in that we hire the best people, we hire great people. and they tend not to fall into this trap. But I think also the focus on training and education and testing folks before they actually get to on-call means that generally by the time people get on call in an SRE team, the team have got very good confidence in them and the team are very supportive of them. If we did get into a situation where we thought we had a failing engineer, then clearly that's like a performance management problem, and that's something as managers that we'd need to handle. But generally, SRE is a supportive environment and it's a very training and education-oriented environment. We would like to think that we get people educated to handle those incidents well before they get on call. And as I say, if we had concerns about somebody, then clearly that would just be a performance management issue. Conveniently, the person next to you has a question.
How do you keep people in SRE teams motivated? I find that it requires a particular mindset, and if you don't have it, you won't be motivated at all.
Yeah, so I think the way that we keep folks motivated is there is a common goal. So there is a common goal between the SRE and SWE teams, and that is to provide a reliable, effective service to our customers. That is a common goal. Everybody wants to do that, and everybody's pretty motivated to do that. It's just that the project work that we do is different. What we tend to find is we give people the freedom to transfer out, and we realize that it's not for everyone. SRE is not a profession that everybody wants to do because it is kind of different to a regular SWE role. However, having said that, there is plenty of scope for SWE-style projects. We are software engineers. We write code to solve all these problems. So we're always looking for software-style solutions to the issues that we face as SREs. I think making sure that we structure the projects properly is a good way to keep people motivated. We're very lucky at Google in that we run some amazing services at incredible scale. If you went to the keynote this morning where Brian showed the Niantic graph, this is incredibly motivating. Anybody who works on that is incredibly motivating. The teams who work for me in London were involved in making that launch a success. And everybody gets motivated by that. Of course they do. So as Google, we're a little bit lucky in that we have such great services and such great scale. We have this kind of trope that says all problems are interesting at scale, and it's kind of true. So we are lucky, but at the same time, we recognize it's not for everyone, and folks can transfer out if they want to. Carry on.
Just brings me to the next question, is that how often would people rotate in and out? Is that common practice that they would frequently rotate in and out of this role?
It tends to be not that common. I mean, what we tend to find is we run this mission control program where regular SWEs can take a 6-month taster of SRE. And quite a lot of those people stay. Quite a lot of them choose to stay in SRE. We also have a flow the other way of SREs who are also SWEs transferring out into regular dev teams. But I wouldn't say that is a significant flow in the outward direction. What you tend to find is there is a significant fluidity within SRE. So we very much value the idea that SREs will transfer between teams. And I think typically something like 15 to 20% of the SRE organization changes team every year. And that's really healthy because one of my colleagues put it the other day, what did he say? Silos can rot. So if you are a siloed team that never changes and never brings new people in, then you can rot in that silo. However, if you can exchange new ideas with other teams that are doing similar things in maybe a slightly different way, that's actually pretty healthy. So we do have quite a healthy rotation within SRE itself. There is an amount of people that transfer out. That is not a serious attrition rate.
So I have 3 questions, if you don't mind.
3 questions?
Yes.
Wow.
So the first one is when you run your war games, the Wheel of Misfortune.
Yep.
Is it a collaborative thing, or each person is isolated from the other? So that's the first question. The second question is, how long is your pager schedule, or how long does one person keeps their pager on? And the third question is, why do we still keep seeing incidents that have a global effect, and they take longer than 30 minutes to roll back? And it seems that the canary strategy doesn't seem to work, and it takes too long to sort them. Like one example is the HTTPS load balancer 7 days ago.
Okay, so 3 questions. First one I've forgotten, so you'll need to repeat it. First one was, Wheel of Misfortune, is it collaborative? So it depends on the team, and it depends how they choose to run it. I've seen it run both as a non-collaborative thing and as an extremely collaborative thing. And I think the 2 things serve different purposes. A non-collaborative thing where you put somebody on the spot is very good for teaching an individual and also testing an individual. So figuring out, as per the question from my colleague in the front here, are they ready to go on call or not? Are they going to panic when they're actually presented with a problem on their own at the weekend? So we run it both ways, and I think it has different goals and different learning outcomes, if you like. Your final question was about global outages. Your second one was about length of pager duty. So we do 12-hour shifts, and SRE teams tend to be geographically diverse in order to make that work. So we'll do 12 hours in, say, European time zone, and we'll have a partner team that does 12 hours, say, on the west coast of the US. And we'll flip-flop between those things. Typically, an SRE will be on call for approximately a week at a time, and they'll get something like 5 or 6 weeks off. In some teams, it would be longer than that, but we don't consider more than 1 week in 6 to be healthy. And the final question, which was the difficult one, was, and I'm going to paraphrase, something like, why do you keep having global outages that take a long time to fix? It's very difficult to explain that specifically. What I would say is when we have those kind of outages, you see extremely thorough external incident reports. And in the most serious one of those that I can remember, Ben Traynor, our SVP, actually personally wrote an extremely long incident report that explained exactly why we had that problem and all of the things that we were doing to fix those things. So we have a bunch of engineering projects underway in order to fix those weaknesses. We understand that we're not perfect. We need to improve. We like to learn from each one of them, and we will get better. There was a question just over there.
Hi.
Hello.
Do your SREs get compensated from call at all?
Yes, they do.
How?
With compensation. I can't say precisely, but yes, they do get compensated.
Is there like a fixed fee and like an overtime for time in act?
I can't say precisely, but yes, they do get compensated. Yes.
And is there any way of them to opt out of on-call?
That is a complicated question. The simple answer is no, but that is a vast oversimplification in that clearly if folks have medical issues or any other issue that would prevent them from doing on-call effectively, then as a responsible employer, we have a job to do to make sure that we have a duty of care to that employee. But on-call is an expectation. If you are an SRE, there is an expectation that you will be on call.
Thank you.
There was a question here, I think. Somebody had their hand up a couple of questions ago.
Hi. I like the idea of the error budget control. Can you tell me how your change management process works and how that feeds into your error budget? So who tests it and who releases into production, who does the QA, and then when these changes fail, how that trickles into your error budget? Yeah,
it really depends. It really depends on the service. So I'll give you an example. This is not how we do it for everything. It will vary by the service within Google, although the principles are the same. So for a service that I have worked on, we have some monitoring that actually tracks the error budget on a daily basis. So There is a query that runs on a nightly basis, figures out what the error budget was yesterday, totals it up, draws a pretty graph on a dashboard. And if the error budget exceeds the threshold, then a ticket is raised. So a bug is raised that says, hey, you better stop launching because you breached the error budget. And then we're frozen. So that ticket will go to the release engineering team who will stop driving launches into prod. And then we have a policy that says, once that ticket is raised, condition Y needs to be satisfied before you can launch again. And there is another condition that needs to get triggered by the automation before we can start launching again. So the principles are different. Other teams will do it in different ways. Other teams will do it in ways that are more automated than that. Others may do it in ways that are less automated than that. But that's the sort of general principle, is we're tracking the errors. And then, it's relatively rare for us to do these things, but it can happen. It's a useful tool. There were some more questions around here somewhere. It might have been right at the front.
Hi. So my question was, basically, are there any basic rules about how to define ownership of producing the incident report? Are there any, if things happen, is the SRE responsible for raising the report, or is it the engineer who developing the software who define it? And then when the action items are defined, and how do you triage them, put that into a priority? What's the thinking process of defining ownership of the incident and the action item?
This is a really great question. I very much like this question. So the way that we do this is the person who was kind of nominally the owner of the incident is the person that owns the post-mortem. So typically that is an SRE who was on call for a service that was pivotal in it. So for example, I spent a lot of time running the App Engine SRE team, and in that team, if there was a problem with App Engine, the App Engine on-caller would start the postmortem and write it. We would then pull in dependent teams or teams that were running our dependencies if we thought they had specific input to add to it. In terms of the action items and how we prioritize them, we actually have a very simple mechanism internally for how we prioritize action items. There is, if you like, a checklist for the priority of those items. And we have an SLO in terms of how quickly those bugs need to be fixed. And teams are policed on how quickly they fix those bugs. Now that process is separate from the process of writing a public-facing incident report. The public-facing incident report is something that we attempt to produce relatively quickly, and it tends to be our customer-facing support operation who produce those reports. They are done with a lot of input from SRE, so they're done with a lot of input from the postmortem. They're done with a specific set of approvers who can actually approve them for release. But typically they are written by customer-facing folks who are used to facing off with customers and using the kind of language that customers are that is familiar to customers externally. Internal postmortems obviously tend to be buried very much in internal Google speak and jargon about the services that we run. They would not make a lot of sense as external documents. I have another question here, and also somewhere else. We have many questions.
So when you're rolling out a new service and defining a SLO, let's say on availability, how do you make the call that it should be 99 versus 99.9 versus 99.5?
This is a really good question. And again, what we do there is we try to make that not an SRE decision. So we try to make that a product management decision. So you heard Brian talking this morning. He's the VP of our product management org. And it will be folks in his org, the product management folks who are defining the products, who will specify up front, these are the reliability targets for the service. How they go about choosing that is a business decision. But fundamentally, it comes from the product org. It's not a reverse engineered engineering decision. We make sure that each of those SLOs has got an owner, somebody who is accountable for that SLO. And typically, that is a person in product management.
My question was, you've talked about basically launching new features. What if you come under external attack? Does the same incident management process apply?
What kind of external attack?
I don't know. Somebody hacks you, let's say.
Oh, I thought you meant
Unlikely
like
as it is.
nuclear weapons or something. But,
Yeah, no, not that serious.
external attack. So a DOS attack or something like that? That kind of thing? I'm not really sure what your question is. Is your question, does that count towards the error budget or?
Yeah, it's the same incident process followed to try and fix it.
Yes. That's my answer. The answer is yes. I mean, we manage multiple different types of things using the same kind of incident management response. So DOS attacks, those kind of things, they are managed using the same protocols internally that we would use for dealing with bugs or outages resulting from data center failures or hurricanes or anything like that. We manage them using the same protocols, and they're very well-known protocols that we train. There's a whole sort of training course around incident management at Google that's really, really interesting. And yeah, that is a very widely understood vocabulary that is good for managing all of these things.
Hello. The 50% of the time that is not spent on operations, I assume it's spent on writing code and developing internal tooling. Is that development process different in nature to the development process of the actual customer-facing product? Is there any special sort of treatment that you would like to share around that?
No. In practice, no. Development is development at Google. As Craig said this morning, internally within Google, there is a single repository with all of our code in it. All of our tooling goes in the same place. It is subject to the same code review standards. It's subject to the same standards of testing. It's precisely the same development process and standards that we have for our external-facing products. And the other thing that I'd like to say is it's not just tooling. It's not just tooling and monitoring. We're also working specifically on service binaries in order to make them more reliable, performant, scalable. So again, a good example would be we might work on isolation, for instance. Inter-customer isolation is obviously something we care about a lot in cloud. It's a hard problem. So that is something that we might work on in SRE. So we're actually out of time right now, which means you are not compelled to stay here any longer, but there are lots more questions. I will keep answering.
Just one more.
I don't think you're required for anything else.
Have you ever been in a situation to roll back the previous version and how you are handling the situation when you are losing, for example, sometimes features that you have deployed previously? The clients are using these features and you're rolling back the previous version?
Yes, so this is a really interesting engineering point that I think is different to the way that Google builds software to maybe other places. And that is that we always want to have the facility to roll back quickly. Doesn't matter what the change is or what the rollout is, we always want to have a quick rollback procedure so that we can ameliorate the problem, we can mitigate it quickly. And yes, sometimes that will be a feature that people are using. A feature that people are using doesn't work, you need to roll it back. A feature that people are using has broken something else, you need to roll it back. So yes, that does happen. We very much have a culture of wanting to roll back quickly, and that is our kind of like primary rapid problem-solving tool is roll it back. If it broke, that was contemporaneous with some sort of rollout, roll that rollout back. There's a good chance it will fix it. We can debug it in a test environment and figure out the root cause later. I have a question in the middle there.
You were saying earlier that SREs are empowered to take any and all actions required, and obviously you've got processes in place, but humans are failable naturally. Have you been in a situation where you've had to actively shut a service down, and kind of what does that feel like on a human level outside of the processes involved with that?
This is also a great question. Personally, I've not been in a situation where I've had to do something incredibly punitive like that, but certainly the first time that I was on call and something happened where I needed to actively do something to fix production because there was a problem that was actually hurting a real customer, and I I thought I understood what the problem was. There was an action that I could take that I thought was going to fix it. You know, your finger hand kind of hovers over the enter key quite a few times. You think about it a little bit too long. And yeah, that is very stressful. That is very stressful. But I think that eases with experience. And I don't do on-call anymore, but by the time I'd finished doing on-call, it wasn't like that anymore. I was much happier to not try things, but much happier to take action, in that we want people to be empowered to do that, and we want people to do stuff to fix problems. So yeah, it is stressful. It is stressful for sure. Sometimes it can require escalation, but equally, not doing something is often much worse. So we're a bit over time. Any more questions? There is one question right at the back. I have a question for you, sir, which is, why did you sit right at the back?
How do you protect individual Google Cloud users when the scope of your metrics and monitoring is at quite a high abstract level? So, for example, with the L7 load balancer issue, our instant duration for that was 4 or 5 hours, but it didn't get noticed until it hit from 2% to 43% error rate, and the official 1 hour, 30-minute clock started.
Again, this very much depends on the service, and it depends on how we implement the monitoring and the service level objectives for that service. For many of our services, we have per project level granularity in the monitoring. All of the statistics that you see in Stackdriver, well, not all of them, but many of the statistics that you see in Stackdriver are available for internal debugging. And we'll use those kind of per project statistics to alert us when there are problems that are pervasive across multiple projects. Sometimes it only makes sense to monitor in aggregate rather than to look at per project stuff. There are particular noise effects you can get if we have one extremely large customer or one extremely small customer or whatever. The monitoring can always be improved in situations like that, and coming out of that outage, you know, the ability to detect that outage quicker is one of the key action items, for sure. Sounds like we're done. Thank you very much for your time today. Please enjoy whatever's left.